public lecture series. Got it. That is the public lecture series of the Biomaterials Research Group here at the beautiful TER Institute of Agricultural and Horticultural Science. And of course, a warm welcome to all those who are taking part in today's event via Zoom. We are very happy to have you with us. Last but not least, a very warm welcome to our guest today, Kristin Asdal, who will be presenting her new book, Nature-Made Economy, Thought, Capital, and the Great Economization of the Ocean, which she wrote together with her co-author, Asdal and Huse. Before we get to Kristin's presentation of her book, let me introduce the author with a few words. Kristin has a background in the history of economics and is now professor of STS at the TIC Center for Technology, Innovation and Culture in Oslo, where she focuses on the sociology of knowledge in economics and the natural sciences and how scientific expertise is shaping democracy. In particular, she focuses on the politics of the environment, broadly conceived, and has conducted a number of extensive empirical studies on the politics, economics, and history of the environment and the bioeconomy. To name just a few of her past and present projects, Kristin is currently leading the Value Threads project, where she and her team are exploring the new economic practices that are emerging in the effort to transform the economy towards a green and sustainable one. The aforementioned Value Threads project is a continuation of Kristin's previous ERC grant project, The Good Economy, Biocapitalization, and the Little Tools of Valuation. In this project, Kristin worked with the concept of the good economy to address how to study different values, be they quantitative or qualitative, in the economy, and with the concept of little tools of valuation to address the many mundane techniques that together make up the larger economy. In addition to this theoretical and empirical work, inspired by her interdisciplinary background in the humanities, history, and STS, Kristin has always had a keen interest in methodological issues and has published widely on them. Most recently, in 2022, she and Hilde Reinertsen published a methodological book with SAGE on what they call practice-oriented document analysis, where documents are analyzed as sites, tools, work, texts, issues, and movements, and integrated into a comprehensive method. And the list could easily be extended, but I will stop here and move on to some personal words of praise. In addition to all these theoretical, empirical, and methodological aspects, I am very pleased to welcome Kristin here in Berlin today, as she has also strongly influenced my personal academic path. During my master's program in STS, I took my first seminar in valuation studies with Kristin, who was a visiting professor in Vienna at the time. This seminar had a profound impact on me and my thinking. And a little later, Kristin encouraged me and supported me in my application to the Center for the Sociology of Innovation in Paris, where Kristin regularly spends research days. Since then, Kristin has been an intellectual companion and inspiration for which I am very grateful, and I look forward to future exchanges such as the one we are about to have. So let me close this introduction with a few words about the procedure of today's event. We will start with a presentation of the book by Kristin that will take about 40 minutes. I will then contribute a short commentary in which I try to explore how Kristin's book speaks to the work of our research group and the work at the TER Institute more generally. And I'll interweave this commentary with some questions that came to me while reading. Afterwards, the discussion will be opened to the audience. So without further ado, let's move on to Kristin's presentation. Kristin, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Cornelius. That was really a generous introduction. And I'm very glad to be here. And I agree with Cornelius, it's a very beautiful place. I got lost, but when I came in, it's really nice. And also, it's quite fitting that you have these maps, I think, on the wall, and I will come back to this, and this will help us to understand a little bit what I'm going to be doing. So let me just start. And of course, let me start with our main figure as of today, the Atlantic cod. The Atlantic cod, the fish that people along the Norwegian coast like to call the white gold of the ocean, is, as I said, the main character of this book. So every year, when springtime closes upon the ocean, it will make its journey from the far north, Barents Sea, which is here on the map, but you will also just as nicely see it on this map on the wall. So from the far north Barents Sea to its spawning grounds along the long Norwegian coast, as you can see there and also here. It smells like money, people like to say, as fisheries get busy. And well, the dock starts to smell quite fishy. And it is this species that we travel with and learn from in analyzing what we call, as Cornelius also just introduced, the great economization of the ocean. From this, you might, some of you at least, might catch that there are also other figures that we take on board as our companion figures. First, this is the figure of Carl Polanyi and the work he's very well known for, the Great Transformation. Published just as World War II was about to end, the Great Transformation describes the rise of what Polanyi called market society in the 18th and 19th century. And so I must ask you, is it okay? Can we follow? Does my voice kind of carry over to down there? Okay, yeah, that's good. So Polanyi, as some of you also might know, gives a stark critique of what he saw as the destroying effects of capitalism. Or I put capitalism here, but actually he was quite wary with regards to using this very notion of capitalism, and also switched instead to the notion of market society. Up until then, land, nature, and economy had been tied up with tightly woven social institutions, like the church, the guild, the village, and the neighborhood. No, land was being disconnected from such community context and subordinated to the market mechanism, the orderings of markets. The great transformation our book sets out to analyze is not the transformation of land, but instead the great transformation of the ocean. And I will show you here one of the examples of where you can see how this is imagined going on. Because many of the commodification efforts and practices that render nature economic is currently happening, and in many parallel ways, to the ocean. This illustration up here from the front cover of a report by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, exemplifies the ambition and intensity of pressures towards the ocean. Chapter by chapter, our book sets out to show the conditions of possibility such ambitions rest on. We show that what we today can recognize as a great transformation builds on long-standing efforts, experiments, and laborious experiments, as well as controversies, environmental troubles, mass losses of life in the ocean, and other quite spectacular failings. So, a question: how to study such great transformations? One could imagine that to study great transformations, what we need are great tools, large numbers, statistics, and overviews. And so again, as Cornelius just alerted us to, what we propose instead is the notion of little tools and tools of valuation. We apply these together with the notions of valuation arrangements and value orderings. As we formulate and work with these concepts, they are made to move across the material and the semiotic, across the quantitative and the qualitative, across markets and state bodies, and then lastly, across nature and economy. The concept of little tools, be they a document, a brand, a market survey, or a price tag, is meant to capture that these little tools can, in and of themselves, be quite mundane. But when put to work, they tie up with and enable the workings of larger apparatuses and of valuation arrangements. So little should not be mistaken for insignificant. Instead, It draws attention to an empirical and methodological level, especially apt, we argue, for capturing what we see as versions of economization. So, more questions. Our question: is there an overriding question to this book? So let me move there before returning to this key notion of ours, versions of economization. Just to introduce the book a little bit more, because each of the chapters in the book are written so that they can be read alone. They carry a world, a story, and a problematic of their own. The book can also be read chronologically. It starts with the early deep sea petroleum industry. Oh, that's good. And ends with how the cod performs in emerging China mega markets. Our book writes itself into and seeks to contribute to a set of research fields that are partly, at least, overlapping. Science and technology studies, social studies of markets, and valuation studies. It also speaks to a research field that we suggest should join the conversation, namely environmental humanities. Put bluntly, one of our key research puzzles is this. The field of social studies of markets and valuation studies, much inspired by SDS scholars and research, have in recent years done a lot to open up the economy to empirical research. At the same time, SDS and environmental humanities have opened cultural and social studies to multi-species relations and emphasized nature and its various agencies. With regards to the latter, think only of Michel Callot and the paper he published in Sociological Review already in 1984. And many of you might know this paper. You might even remember the title. Do you? I'll tell you. The full title was Some Elements of a Sociology of Translation, Domestication of, not fish, but of the scallops and the fishermen of Saint-Brieuc Bay. More informally, the paper is simply called and has become known as the scallop paper. The paper has been tremendously influential. It was a form of a recipe for doing what we have come to know as actor network theory, or as it was also called, a sociology of translation. The paper and the theory urged us, social scientists, to bring nature and its various agencies, and here with scallops as the key example, on board in our studies. Yet, the two research interests, actor network theory and the turn to markets on the one hand, and actor network theory turning towards nature agencies on the other, surprisingly quite seldom meet. In social studies of markets, nature agencies remain surprisingly absent. And even more surprisingly, when Michel Callot in his later research turned towards the field of social studies of markets and also did a lot to shape and reshape this field. And I can only mention two examples. For instance, his book, The Laws of the Markets from 1998, and also the later edited book, Market Devices from 2007. The recipe that he had earlier put up for actor network theory about taking nature agencies into account were absent. In fact, in their economization approach, Kaliska and Callot, in a more recent work, suggest that pacification is integral to economization. Put slightly differently, that of rendering things economic includes that of pacifying the object rendered economic. So our study of versions of economization sets out to show how this is indeed otherwise. Throughout the book, we show how nature, the ocean, the Atlantic cod, acts upon the economy. Playing on the notion commodification, there is co-modification, we argue. Nature economies is a relational affair. Engaging with the concept of economization, we intervene and add, there are versions of economization. Economization is not one, and it is not a linear procedure. It comes in patterned versions of reality. Economizations add up to versions that are both semi-stabilized and subject to change. versions of economization engender value struggles. They come into conflict and tension with one another. Consequently, versions of economization resemble what John Law in his Organizing Modernity book calls modes of ordering. And sometimes, and this is important to our book, sometimes economization is not at all about markets. Economization can materialize by way of what we call in the book valuation arrangements and little tools of valuation, tightly linked to the state. And as we study closely in the book, policy documents are little tools that may act as both sides and tools of valuation and take part in economizations. So maps, we also show, are little tools of valuation that help Norway along in becoming a rich oil-producing country, close to famous now from having converted almost all the oil in the ground to oil in a fund. The Norwegian Oil Fund is now one of the world's largest asset funds. Published in 1965, this map here on the wall is one of the most influential maps ever drawn for Norwegian territories. It is an icon of what we in the book call the great economization of the ocean. Often called the shelf map, this is the first of 35 such maps, each new map being updated with the movements of the petroleum and industry. With ocean drilling for petroleum, the possibility of capital investments fixed upon the deep seabed was introduced for the first time, taking the material form of pipes, wells, and platforms. The 1965 map shows where and by whom petroleum exploration is to take place. The map reorders the ocean as a gridded space of state-controlled blocks to be licensed out to commercial companies. Providing a license to drill, the map asserts a new value ordering of the seabed. It is a tool of valuation that performs a radical revaluation of the ocean, valuing it not for its fish, military conquest, or as a place of transportation, but for its future oil income. This is also, as the lines around the gridded structure show, a territory. Just months before the shelf map's publication, this territory was extended to include the so-called continental shelf. The ocean seabed becomes a form of capital, a space for securing strategically wealth for the nation. Still, the neatness of this map does not reflect realities. As the petroleum industry began to grow, there were accidents, littering, and oil spills, and there were fishers being pushed out of what to them were the best areas of the ocean. The shelf map does not only revalue by way of what it makes present, new forms of capital investment and accumulation. It also values by making absent. Neither fish banks, nor fishes are here present. What is also not present is the valuation struggle that became known as the oil-fish conflict, where the fishers claim compensation for the loss of fishing grounds. As part of this, other maps, one of these here, were created and that acted as a form of counter-valuing. Curved and winding, the lines of these maps show exactly what is at stake: fishing grounds, or to be more specific, good fishing grounds. In contrast to what appears on the gridded shelf map as empty blocks for the taking, these maps enact an ocean filled with already existing economic activity, an ocean being valued as already economized, but in a very different version. Here, the gridded structure of the shelf map is also present, but it is confronted by another economic space, that of the fisheries, and therefore also of the fish, and how fish swim and move in the seasons of the fisheries. Another version of economization does come to view, and the maps make present what in the shelf map is absent. You follow still? It is interesting here to think with the sociologist Malcolm Foucault. Foucault has carefully analyzed how specific valuation techniques are used to value intangible goods. Also in her case, this is about oil, or oil spills to be precise. Foucault shows how the tools of economics are used to value the loss of nature, and how this enables the issue of compensation to be settled in court. Our case is different because economics is not all there is, and it's not only economics that are put to work to value. Maps, it suggests, can also act as tools that value, revalue, and countervalue. Such tools of valuation can be part of other little tools, like policy documents, and they can work within larger valuation arrangements and orderings, like that of political procedure and the state, which was what happened in our case. And in fact, throughout the chapters of our book, we follow the Atlantic Code into state bodies and agencies. And we observe how the state works in tandem with science and market agencies to grow the ocean, which was literally what one had the ambition to happen. And so you must look closely at this quite fascinating picture, and it will also be the last picture that I will show. So the state, as I said, worked in tandem with science and market agency to grow the ocean and turn it into a farmland. And you can see here again the spade being digged quite literally into the ocean. And so the cod is being asked to play the role of a farmed and a domesticated animal, apt for industrial scale production. However, the cod, we also learn, resists and troubles these efforts, resulting in huge losses of both cod lives and investment capital. Alongside this, we observe an innovation economy is so pushed into place. And so actually the second part of my lecture will move more closely into this version of economization that we call the innovation economy. This is, interestingly, an economy that never sees failure as futile. It is an economy that seeks to learn and always try again, creating successive waves of large investments and spectacular failings, but also bringing carefully marketed cod bodies to the emerging mega markets of places like India and China. Empirically, what we do in this book is what we suggest calling empirical economy. Not so unlike the notion of empirical philosophy put forward by Anne-Marie Moll, we take this to signify an analytics that is grounded not in predetermined principles about what economy is, but that seeks to understand economy by way of how it comes about in practice, and so also what it does. In its most basic sense, empirical economy is about studying economy as it unfolds and comes into being. It is about attending to the practices of economy, to trace these as versions of economization emerge, unfold, stabilize, are disrupted, and even destroyed, and about how this takes the form of patent realities and consequently has real-life consequences. So what are these versions of economization more precisely? As I said, one of the versions of economization which the book seeks to delineate is the version of economization that is the innovation economy. So how to approach this economy of innovation? One way of trying to delineate this could be to start with its classics, Schumpeter, for example, and his theory, for example, about the entrepreneur and his ideas about the role of creative instruction. This is not our procedure. Rather, what the book does, and this is specifically in chapter 7, with the title Into Innovation, and I will come back to why that is the title. We follow the Atlantic Code as it is turned into an object of innovation, and we seek to discern the innovation paradigm by how this plays out in practice. So what is it that we find? First, there is the issue of performativity. If you are somewhat familiar with the field of social studies and markets, and not the least in its Calot/SDS version, you will know about the argument about performativity. Economics or economic theory, this says, do not simply observe and model markets. Economics actively perform markets. I have made a similar argument in relation to documents. All documents, be they as sachlich, dry, and supposedly neutral as they may seem, act upon the very issue they are writing about. The innovation paradigm and the innovation strategies and plans that we investigate are as if performative par excellence. The innovation paradigm is thoroughly action-oriented, oriented towards making things happen, of drawing things together into possible action and innovation. Second, there is the issue of agency. I mentioned about the challenge that this book is taking upon itself to work upon. That of analyzing how nature, and then the codfish in our case, works upon the markets, and also how this needs to be reflected in our social studies of markets. Yet what we observe in the innovation paradigm is something else or something more. It is not only nature that is behaving and sought made to behave in a certain way. Capital, a key element to innovation, is also asked to behave in certain ways. What is in demand is capital that is competent, patient, and risk-willing. And what is in demand is not simply flows and quantities of capital, but certain properties and qualities of capital. As such, the worth of capital is changing. So what is the objective then when subjecting the codfish to innovation? I started out the introduction to our book by the Atlantic cod swimming freely or according to its own instincts from the Barents Sea and into the Norwegian coast to spawn. Turned into an object of innovation, the objective is to turn the codfish into a farm animal, as I said. In other words, to turn it more into a salmon, or to model the codfish upon the salmon, which at the turn of the millennium had proved that the fish farming industry could grow fast and be quite profitable. Now the cod was in need of equal investments. Key to this innovation paradigm is the double entendre or marketization, that of manufacturing the codfish into a viable market commodity on the one hand, and capitalization, rendering the codfish an object of investment on the other. This double operation is a process of co-modification. The innovation paradigm, we suggest, works by such co-modifications. It is key to this version of economization. It is about making both capital, biocapital included, and markets to behave and to grow. Surely, innovation as such is not, as we all know, not in itself something new. I mean, I just refer to the work of Schumpeter. Yet, at the turn of the millennium, innovation as a mode of economization emerges as a form of public policy. In fact, it becomes intimately coupled with the state machineries, and interestingly, somewhat in tension with neoclassical economics. Time is too short here, and you might be glad for it, to delve into the details of how this came in tension with one another, but it's a very interesting side to it. And so this link to the state plays out, and this is what I will go into, plays out in three ways at least. The state is asked to support innovation and is seen to be able to provide exactly the right and patient form of capital. Second, it happens by how the state is acted upon and asked to take it upon itself to act as an investor. And three, it happens by way of an articulate form of public policy oriented towards being learning-oriented, co-creation-oriented, dynamic, and risk-willing. Method-wise, what are we doing? What is the book and the chapter doing? We follow the double life of capital. How? One, a capital is put forward as that which is to fund innovation. And second, how the codfish is rendered a form of biocapital, the very object that monetary capital is seeking to invest in, and how they both need to behave. The book as a whole combines ethnography with document analysis, a form of what we call document ethnography. Here in this chapter on innovation, we follow how the Atlantic cod is subjected to innovation and acted upon by way of a document species we call cod plans. We analyze these as both sides and tools of innovation and see them as little tools of valuation. The cod plans were issued by the Norwegian Research Council and in cooperation with what at the time was established as an agency called Innovation Norway. We analyze them as sides of action and tools of evaluation, tools that actively register, consider, move, praise, direct, judge, assemble, and qualify the various elements that are drawn into the enterprise of making cod farming happen, or as I will show, not happen. This speaks to innovation as a version of economization and its dogma of interaction, and that of being dynamic, and how this is put to work. Integral to this is, interestingly, we suggest, an ethos about the virtue of failing. Innovation might fail, but listen, these failures are something from which we can learn. Thus, get up and try again. And obviously, risk-willing capital is precisely the kind of capital that might fail, run the risk of being lost. So, to start moving towards summing up and a conclusion, following the cod plans, we discern the innovation paradigm as a version of economization. They are sides for acting out the very innovation paradigm. They enact the dynamic approach that we observe to be at the core of the paradigm. Key to this is having actors come together to learn and fail in shared constellations and problem solving. This is not neoclassical economics. This is not primarily about detecting market failures or states of equilibrium. This version of economization is about realizations, set out, as I said, to be performative, to realize values and act out an innovation economy. Its mode of ordering is to have actors, elements, and in our case, the codfish too, to be in it, as if together. The overriding value being cooperation and coordination. The cod plans then are not so much formal plans after all. Rather, they are tools that value, assist, and underpin coordination and work as tools for making things come together. We should also observe that as a version of economization, the innovation paradigm is less about conflicts, less about principle of interest that compete groups or actors with viewpoints that differ, assumptions that clash, opposing objectives to choose between, winners or losers. Nothing of that sort. No, a key trait of the innovation paradigm as a version of economization is rather to internalize. It takes what is outside inside into innovation as elements to work upon, problems to solve, hindrances to overcome, and obstacles or bottlenecks that must be surpassed. The aquaculture enterprise is particularly apt for grasping the innovation paradigm as a version of economization. It allows us to capture how the potential in the bio, the codfish and its natural environment, the ocean, becomes a challenge. Not with regards to limiting growth, but as something to be worked upon and overcome. In other words, nature is taken into innovation. Nature, our analysis suggests, is transformed from being predominantly situated outside the economy as something holding limits and worlds of its very own, to becoming nature subjected to innovation. There are, as such, in this version of economization, no limits to growth, only problems to be overcome. And this is not to say that environmental and ethical challenges are not addressed and deemed relevant. It is rather that solving them becomes a precondition to further growth. Also, and this is quite important, this is not to say that this version of economization will not fail. And the cod farming enterprise is a case in point. In the end of our story, at least, it became evident that the entire cod farming was failing spectacularly at it, and the whole industry was collapsing. By the end of 2014, there was not a single living farm cod left in the sea. That is, except for those that had escaped. and there were quite many of them. Both the financial crisis and a disease crisis hit hard. In some of the pens, just about all the fish got sick. In the worst period, one would remove between 3,000 and 5,000 dead fish from only one pen every single day. This was literally liquidity slaughtering. When the enterprise in question is that of dealing with living creatures, such as tiny cod fry or grown and spawning cod bodies, the merits in learning by failing, as prescribed in the innovation economy, are perhaps not of equal worth or value. To conclude, our book is about the great economization of the ocean, assisted and enabled by the little tools of evaluation that enable this to happen. It starts from the analysis of Polanyi about the great transformation of land, at the territory we call land, and the coming into being of the market economy. It moves the analysis towards the ocean to analyze not the coming of being into a market economy, but coming into being of distinct versions of economization. One of these versions of economization is innovation. A version of economization that is working through learning by failing, co-creation oriented, dynamic, risk-willing, co-modifying, performativity, and action-oriented, working by taking what is outside into innovation.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, many thanks, Kristin, for this great insight into your book. As I announced earlier, I would like to follow up on this presentation with a brief commentary and questions interwoven with the commentary. The question I've asked myself in writing this commentary is, how does Kristin's book speak to the research in our research group, Biomaterialities, and at the TER Institute more generally, and what questions arise from this? This is not the easiest question to answer, as our research group and the TER Institute are quite interdisciplinary. Our research group alone includes critical political economists, political scientists, and STS scholars. The TER Institute employs economists, political scientists, and of course, numerous natural scientists from various disciplines. So to create a common ground between all these groups, I decided to structure my commentary around 3 recurring themes from Kristin's book that might be of interest to all these groups, at least in my estimation. To borrow a classic STS concept, I think of these recurring themes from Kristin's book as boundary objects, that is, objects that form part of multiple social worlds, for example, scientific disciplines, and facilitate communication between them. So let's jump right in. The first of these themes is the bioeconomy, which plays a central role in Kristin's book, but which is also the focus of our research group and numerous other researchers from different disciplines at the TER Institute. Kristin's book and much of her previous work can be seen as an extension, or perhaps for some, a provocation of former social science debates about the bioeconomy. Specifically, Kristin develops the critique that previous social science analysis of the bioeconomy, and by extension biocapital, have primarily examined how the associated economic practices transform the bio, or the living. Kristin counters these studies by arguing that in order to really understand the bioeconomy, we also need to look at how the bio is transforming economic practices in return, or to use her conceptual vocabulary, how the bio and the economy co-modify one another, with a hyphen between the co and the modifier. In chapter 3 in particular, Kristin analyzes the co-modification processes that have accompanied the emergence of a bioeconomy revolving around cod. The chapter examines the work that scientists did on cod bodies in the 1960s and 1970s to domesticate the species and make it suitable for industrial farming. It describes how the work of these scientists sought, and in part succeeded, in transforming the bodies of the codfish into biocapital, a process that Kristin describes as biocapitalization. However, in keeping with Kristin's attention to co-modification, the chapter also shows again and again how cod is not passive and how it changes the practices of the scientists and the economies connected to them. One example the authors give in the chapter is that scientists have to become very familiar with the things that cod eat and the cycles in which they eat, a learning process without which they would never succeed in turning cod into biocapital. I find this argument in relation to the bioeconomy and the concept of co-modification in general very compelling. And I have observed similar processes of co-modification between natural and economic actors in my own research. For example, I observed how the team of a German startup traveled halfway around the world, all the way to India, to collect image data of a certain plant disease that they could not find in Germany. However, and this brings me to my first question, although I have no doubt that the bioeconomy and other areas of the economy are characterized by co-modification, I am still struggling to put my finger on why knowledge of these co-modification processes matters. So my first question then is the following. What difference does knowledge about the co-modification processes involved in the creation of bioeconomies make? Is there a normative or political dimension to doing research about the co-modification processes that enable or not bioeconomies? Or asked even more directly, can knowledge about the co-modification of the living and the economy help to create bioeconomies that are greener, more sustainable, or better? I can repeat the questions in the end, but I will turn to the next theme. The second theme that I would like to highlight as a common ground between Kristin's book and the work in our research group and the TER Institute more generally is the analysis of political documents. In fact, the TER Institute has many researchers dedicated to analyzing agricultural policy documents and producing excellent research. Nevertheless, and without claiming to be intimately familiar with the various analysis of policy documents produced at the TER Institute, I would argue that Kristin's approach almost certainly represents an interesting departure from these analyses. This departure lies in the method of practice-oriented document analysis developed by Kristin. The core idea of this method is not to reduce documents to the meaning ascribed to them by their authors, but to take seriously the materiality of documents and their circulation through space and time as social realities. To put it in the author's own words, doing practice-oriented document analysis, and I quote from page 8, means to examine how documents do not simply represent a reality out there, but enact specific versions of it, and alongside this, perform valuations and orderings of their own. This original methodological approach allows the authors to follow the cod through an impressive variety of time periods and settings. For example, in chapter 2, the book introduces us to maps that contributed to a reorganization and revaluation of the ocean after the Second World War, when offshore drilling came into conflict with the fishing industry. Chapter 4 familiarizes us with various policy documents circulating in the Norwegian parliament while enacting specific forms of nature. And chapter 5 analyzes another set of documents issued by public organizations in Norway and how they create what is referred to as an innovation economy around cod. I am fascinated by the method of practice-oriented document analysis, and my second question is therefore of a methodological nature, and it reads as follows. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about the concrete work of doing practice-oriented document analysis. I know you have written a whole book on this method, but could you briefly walk us through the main steps of a research project based on this method, perhaps using a characteristic chapter from Nature-Made Economy as an example? And the third and final theme of the book that I would like to comment on is your call, if you like, for doing empirical economy. As you define in chapter 8, doing empirical economy means, and I quote, understanding economy by way of how it comes about in practice, or put slightly differently, studying economy as it unfolds and comes into being. With regard to research at the TER Institute, this term is interesting because many different forms of economic research are conducted here, ranging from classical agricultural economics to STS and valuation studies inspired approaches to Marxist political economy, with the term allowing these schools of thought to be brought into dialogue of sorts. Despite this suitability to stimulate dialogue between different schools of economic thought, the practice of doing empirical economy, as you define it, of course, also comes with some underlying assumptions that may lead to frictions, I suppose. I'm thinking here, for example, of the avoidance of large economic categorizations such as neoliberalism and capitalism. The argument that the great economization, the argument that the great economization of the ocean, which appears in the title of the book, is more to be understood as a kind of patchwork of smaller versions of economization, goes in a similar direction. Large economic categories of exploration are abandoned in favor of smaller, empirically grounded ones. Your book illustrates many of the advantages of such an approach to the analysis of economic activity, from the nuanced description of economic and other valuation practices that it allows to the possibility of considering the agency of more than human actors in economic processes, to the possibility of considering the processuality of categories such as value, capital, or the good. Given these many advantages of doing empirical economy, I'm curious what, in your estimation, are the disadvantages of this approach compared to other schools of thought concerned with the economy, if any. So my final question is, what, if anything, are the limits of doing empirical economy? Can all economic activities be researched equally well with this approach, or are there some where empirical economy reaches its limits? And with this third question, I have reached the end of my commentary. I suggest that I can repeat the questions all.
No,
okay.
They were terrifying, and of course they were posed. No, do you want me to start trying to answer?
Yes,
or maybe I need some help from the audience. Okay, so let me thank you so much. It was kind of really interesting, also the way it goes to the core of the book and the arguments that it tries to make. And so maybe I could start with the last question. I think I think it would be completely kind of naive and not very helpful, I think, if I were sitting here from this book and arguing that from now on everyone should do empirical economy in the same way that we are trying to do. So of course there are limits to it, and I think that, but I'm not really, I wouldn't say I know what are the limits. What we were trying to kind of put forward was that there are possibilities that comes with it. And so hopefully that it can do something that other approaches will not do in the same way. And of course, also I would sincerely hope that it can work kind of together with other approaches. So, but I do think that so maybe I would rather than try to say something about what hopefully would be their advantages. And at least I think it speaks to the question of home modification that you asked initially. And hopefully the idea was and is that this notion of commodification is also part of an doing empirical economy approach, in the sense that it's meant to draw us into the very, very concrete co-modification practices that are active in the making of economies. And it's also a quite distinct argument when it comes to suggesting that if we are to grasp, catch, take an interest in a relatively open way with regards to how nature makes economy, then an empirical oriented study of economy drawn towards co-modifications are kind of meant to assist in that. And of course, those of you who have a background or are linked to science and technology study would know also the notion of co-production that was initially suggested by Sheila Jasanoff and Brian Wynn, and also has in part been used and developed by Gunilla Thun and others. They often, the co-production idiom is often kind of working at the larger sphere, so to speak, and then see how these spheres come together. So, but it's obviously it's linked to this in trying to show more the modifying work. So it's playing on the very kind of intimate, detailed practices that are modifying work. And then, of course, it's also playing, of course, on the commodification concept, that it's a way of studying the economy as co-modifications. So I do think, but of course, this is a kind of, we suggest that it works for us, and I couldn't say if it will work in the same way for others, right? Would you like to follow up on that? The question, you think that I'm but I also think that what you are, where you had something about kind of this thing, you use this notion small and large. And of course, there is a reason why we suggest the version of economization rather than simply economization. So we are interested in versions of economization, as I said, as pattern realities. And so, but the kind of the smallness or greatness of these pattern realities can differ. And it's more than that we're arguing that we need to stay with the small. It's rather that it's actually quite optimistic when, in the sense that it's trying to show that if we go into quite detailed, close reading of the practices that unfolds in a series of code plans, for instance, that we can from that see something different of this thing that we think that we know what is the innovation economy. Mm-hmm. So that we can actually give meaningful sense and analysis about what these kind of pattern realities of an innovation economy, what it is and what it does. So it's a different form of critique in a way that we can, I suggest, do from that kind of from the ground empirical economy approach, hope to achieve. So that, yeah, so it's more suggestions that kind of claims that this has been done in this way. And then, of course, you're very difficult to question about how can you outline a research program, how you do it on practice with practice-oriented document analysis. I think it's not so easy to say how to do it. It's more kind of, I try to say what we did, because this is a book that is based on kind of classical ethnography and also document ethnography, but put on the same level, so to speak. So following the codfish through kind of classical ethnography and documents, and be able to not using documents as the background that says something about what something that informs one about something, but that are part of the agents. And I do think that, and that I would strongly argue that I do think that captures a serious element of how politics come about. that documents are not simply, of course, they are not simply in the background. That is something that we can analyze as discourses or something that inform us about policies, but they are actively shaping realities. And so there's so much happening in them and by them. So I do think that they deserve kind of a much more detailed interest. And so, but in order to do that, we have to shift the lenses towards what is happening there in them and what are they doing, rather than kind of what are they saying and how can we analyze what they are saying.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, yeah.
And so taking them out there in the world rather than to have them at our back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I think then we open up the floor for questions from the audience. Are there any questions already? Otherwise, I will keep a list. You had a question? Okay, then maybe we start with Pascal.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much. I think it was quite interesting and really inspiring also for leaders of your commentary. And I wanted to follow up on the policy document question and the methodological one, because I think I'm one of the political scientists Cornelius was referring to.
Okay.
From this institute.
Yeah.
And my question was, do you distinguish between policy documents and other types of documents? Because I was asking myself, with policy documents not per se are produced or created to have an effect or to act upon the issues they are dealing with, people, whatever, nature, what to say. So, and they do represent the result of an explicitly political process. And this might be, this may be a difference to other types of documents where the agency is more hidden. And I wanted you to ask maybe to reflect a bit on that.
I think that some of the main points is to be very, very specific about what kind of documents that we are dealing with. So I was trying, for instance, now in my talk, to be very, very specific about this particular kind of innovation documents, for instance. What are their particular ways of acting, and how are they acting? What are their modes of acting, so to speak? So in a sense, I would completely agree. In principle, all documents would have a particular forms of agency, but the question is what kind of agency is it that they are having? And of course, policy document, as you say, would be always oriented towards making something happen. But very often when we analyze them, we tend to analyze them towards the decisions that they enable or do. So if you, for instance, would be reading chapter 4 that Cornelius was referring to, we are very kind of interested in what is actually happening in this document, also bioeconomy and materiality wise, right? And showing, for instance, in that chapter, how the ocean is made into a space to be grown. So how the ocean, through particular documents, are made to become a form of farmland. So in that sense, it's kind of transforming also a little bit what policy is about, in the sense that it's not only to take a decision, how should we regulate this particular aquaculture enterprise, how much money should we provide, who should take care of this. It's also that there are more things happening. So in a sense, making policy documents, seeing documents also as sites for doing the bioeconomy in particular ways. And so a main argument for us, and a leading trend, so to speak, is to try to show how is it that nature and the economy are drawn together and produce something new through these particular policy documents. Do you see what I mean? Yeah. And also another thing which I said at the beginning, in the sense that we tend to think that when it comes to economization, it's a question for economics, right? And economists, a particular form of expertise that those who are trained as economists, but trying to show how economizations are very interesting and importantly happening by way of policy documents, which we tend to think are not that kind of species, if you see what I mean. And it's both, and then it can act both as a critique, but also as a way of opening up how we understand where economy is happening. So it's also opening it up from belonging to a particular form of expertise, right? So in the broader field of SDS, we have been extremely clever at opening up laboratories and biology and kind of natural sciences, and then we're just kind of saying, well, let us do the same for economics and organizations. That's a long answer.
Okay, yeah, we have one question online, and then next question, Anna, Max, and Ulrika. Okay. So first question online. Let's hope the technology works. We need to unmute. Yeah, now you should be unmuted.
Okay.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi everybody. Thank you for the fascinating presentation and also the organization of this talk. I hope you can hear me all right. I hear myself double now. I don't know if.
Okay.
But I'm
trying. But maybe we can also stop the PowerPoint presentation, because then we can also see you. We should be able to see you. Yeah, not better. And can we turn down the volume a little bit? Yeah, try to. Yeah, we'll do a second try now.
Okay.
Maybe until, or maybe, no, wait a second and then. So mal das Mikro schon zu schalten. Das hier? You're after that? Would that be fine with you?
Yeah.
And then we continue with the question from the room. Anna?
So thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. I'm Anna from the Weizsäcker Institute, and I also have a background in valuation studies.
Yeah.
And so I found it very, very interesting how you describe kind of the lack of valuation studies on kind of the co-production of value. And this is what I took from your talk. And I also would totally agree that valuation studies focuses a lot on practices, but not so much on materiality or the agency of materiality, nature or technology in producing value. And so I really liked your idea of co-modification, but I'm not really sure if I can I fully understand where you kind of locate this commodification. And so maybe you can elaborate a bit more on that, and to be a bit maybe provocative. What I took from the talk, it's more like that there are kind of people from the economy activating certain evaluation tools, such as documents and other things, to kind of create a new market. And I'm sure that this is not what you want to say, but maybe you can elaborate a bit more on this commodification idea, because I found this really, really interesting.
Thank you. I'm not sure if I understood the provocation, in the sense that, I mean, maybe it is maybe I'm provoking without knowing it. So in the sense, one of the ways, in one of the sites at which we tried to show the unfolding of co-modification is precisely in efforts to produce new markets by actively kind of aligning the modification of the very properties of the cod bodies and its ways of reproducing, controlling when it enters into puberty, controlling its reproduction cycle, and to modify that with what is kind of expected to be needed from the side of the market. For instance, that the cod needs to be sufficiently large in order to be kind of profitable enough. If one is to, if it just to be kind of if it can be sold in sufficiently large quantities to a market. So it's also very, very concretely to show how this is happening. And also trying to show how, for instance, surveys with regards to what consumers want directly is put to work in order to kind of transform how the code is presented, how the code is meant to grow, what agencies that is expected to be cared for, you know? So in that sense, that is exactly part of the co-modifications that we try to show, right? But I understood your question as if you thought that were that would not be sufficient if for making the co-modification something valuable or interesting to you, at least.
And I was just, I mean, you were referring to.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, you were referring to Michel Calon and the story of the scallops. And his story on the scallops take a real active part in the productive market, or which then fails. But and this is the question I had, and maybe provocation, I thought, which might be provocative if I say that there are these economic agents who try to make a new market and adapt the code or modify the code for this market. And so I do not really see the co-production, but rather like the production of these agents of a new market. And so this is kind of the question.
Yeah, so I think then maybe if I understood you correctly, maybe I can answer in a better way, in the sense that what we also try to show is that how this also very, very seriously failed. It's not necessarily that this works, and when it doesn't work, it is also very much related to how, to put it that way, how a species like the cod also refuses, so to speak, to cooperate in these processes, right? So, and also it's not only about understanding markets, but it's also about not kind of taking the species into account in a way which kind of understand what it needs and how it moves and relates to other species, right? If you see what I mean. Yeah. But I mean, speaking about the paper by Michel Calon, my argument was that it's quite surprising that in this earlier study on scallops, then there is lots of agency. And interestingly, in that paper, the market is taken for granted. You know, you remember the formulation that there are hungry consumers waiting for the scallops for Christmas, right? So this market is there already. So, but when Calon kind of interestingly moves to study markets, then he's very, very interested in the construction of the markets, but then not so interested in the agency of the scallops or other species any longer. So it's also an argument trying how can we make this go together.
Okay, yeah, then we'll do a second attempt with Franziska's question. Yeah, you are unmuted now. Yeah, let's hope that you don't hear yourself double.
Okay, yeah, and I hope you can hear me all right. So I'm a political economist, but I'm also very drawn to kind of STS lately ever more. And but yeah, what I also like in the very recent work by Calon, he's kind of thinking about the transformation of markets also through theorizing, so not through the material. So I wondered what your notion of this more kind of co-modification of nature and economy, what that means in terms of transformation. So, I mean, one obvious question is, right, how can we structure the co-modification of nature and economy in such a way that ecological concerns are kind of addressed in some way? So I wondered, like, on many levels, what you think about this. So like on the kind of practical level in terms of solutions, but also on a theoretical level in terms of how to think about this. Is there also a material element to thinking about this question that, for instance, Calon is not considering in his proposal to kind of reconstruct theories in a kind of performative way? And yeah, also kind of your political view on this. I'd be curious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it really, thank you so much. And I think it actually relates to some part of the question that Cornelius also asked, which I didn't answer in a way, about could this be a better way? Are there better ways of doing things? And can some of the concepts that we suggest be better ways? I think, how should I answer? How should I answer? I think on the one hand, I think on the one hand, the book is written, and hopefully so that when it is being read, one might sometimes be surprised, hopefully, that is this the way the innovation economy works, and so that you to go into the details of it, that you can see how it fails in quite surprising ways, and also. So I wouldn't say, I don't know, I'll have to try to figure out how to explain our stance in relation to it. It's kind of, that is when it comes to the innovation economy, that is kind of one thing, and trying to show how problematic it is, not by kind of arguing, this is very problematic, this is so problematic, we cannot have it, this is not kind of a huge critique like that, but to showing through a very detailed example how that there are serious problematics with the way in which the economy and innovation economy works, and that this becomes particularly visible when we take its work upon a species like the codfish into account. And I do think that if we do not do this detailed analysis, it's not so easy to observe how it is problematic in this way. So that would be kind of one chapter and one answer. But then there is also another chapter, which is I think it's chapter 7, it's called Prices for Collective Concerns. And so that chapter is more about, well, we do very often tend to take for granted that prices are a question of the market. But actually what we try to show is that when it comes to prices for the codfish, it's a result of huge political struggles and strikes and demands to have a good price. So rather than saying that, well, this economy should be otherwise, we're also trying to show empirically that it is already in many instances otherwise. So in opening it up as a political question through an analysis of the politics that is involved in setting prices and doing economization. So it's a critique in a sense by showing, hopefully, that the economy has always been otherwise. It is otherwise, and it must continue to be otherwise. And so we raise in the last chapter this issue about the good economy. What can a good economy be? How shall we think about it? And thus, in a way, the codfish have value outside economizations. How, in what case, how should we then think about that? But it's not kind of a definite answer to it. But maybe I'm naive in the sense that I do think that the way of narrating the story is also a way of doing a form of kind of empirical critique, so to speak. That would at least be my hope. But this is really up to if there were readers of the book, if it works like that. Because and a lot of critique also works by repetition. When we know the critique too well already, it doesn't work so well. So it also needs to kind of work upon the stories that we tell. Is this any way an answer? But thanks a lot for the question. It's something we really struggle with also throughout our working of the book.
It's thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. And I mean, I haven't read your book yet, but I will read it now, so I look forward to that.
For free by MIT Press.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we have 3 questions from the room, and then 1 more question online. So we start in the room. Max, it's your turn.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would be curious to learn a little bit more about the method that you describe as document ethnography. So I'm familiar with normal ethnography, some sorts, and I'm also a little bit familiar with like traditional historical methods of working with documents. So I was wondering how your method differs from these two. It sounds like it sits between.
Yeah, I think I always becomes a bit kind of modest when it comes to this question. I mean, how does your method do things very differently from all the other methods, right? So I wouldn't say that, but I mean, Cornelius also referred to this book already, doing document analysis, a practice-oriented method. And maybe I should tell a little bit of the story from how it was developed in a way, because I started to do I came from history. I started to work. I came during my PhD to be part of the group of PhD students working with Bruno Latour, and everyone were doing ethnography. And I was kind of at the time I just continued to work with my own kind of way with the documents and archives, and it took years for me to manage to articulate what I was doing with the documents. And also I realized the ways in which kind of conventional historical document analysis could be enriched by the practice term that has been more general in the social sciences and from ethnography. So as Cornelius also mentioned, there are these what we propose as 6 methodological moves in doing a practice-oriented document analysis. So it's to approach document as a form of site, as an ethnographic site. Well, that's one thing, and also to explore. I wouldn't have time. I have to go into details, but we have time. And another way would to explore document movements and to kind of trace how is it that documents move and how do the issues move along with them. You know.
Okay, but then for this, so this is what I assume it would be, but then you need kind of additional documents, right? So you can't trace the move of one document by only looking at this document, but then you kind of trace it in other documents.
Right. So, but that is an empirical question. I mean, do you stay with one document? I'm really interested only in this document, and you can stay with this, or you can kind of follow different documents around, or you can follow one document and how that document moves. So that would be kind of an empirical question, which is very much about your own question and research question and research interest. Is it kind of a so you see what I mean? And so then also particular documents might be working as tools, and how is it that they work as tools to make something happen outside themselves, right? And so also one document might be a site in itself, but whereas I also do another study now, I hope to be finished at some time, at some point, which is a study of Parliament, which I also conceptualize as a document site. Because almost nothing can happen in a parliament without it being kind of related to a particular document. So it's an agency that is kind of composed by way of documents. So you can analyze this site as a document, and you can also analyze distinct documents as a document site, and you can analyze how a document is modified from one document to the next. But you can also analyze what I call modifying work within a distinct document, and then investigate how is it that the issue is being transformed within that document. And then you need to kind of see how issues are grown, so to speak, inside the document, and have an eye for that there are activities playing out in the document. And also we are doing that also in conversation with SDS research, where the practice term in SDS and care studies, for instance, were very much about practices that were opposed to the formal and organizational. So we wanted to take also documents back in to be part of practices, if you see what I mean. So. Yeah, partly partly answer. I just came from Stuttgart where I did 8 hours workshop on practice-oriented document analysis. So I really like to talk about it, but probably that's not so.
No, it's good.
Yeah.
It also relates a little bit to my second question, which went into a similar direction. One, maybe if I may, one follow-up question. Then, do you also trace the documents in this kind of very Latourian sense, like following them physically through an organization or something like that? Is this also part? Or
yeah, that can be a document movement. Of course, also, I mean, this is also how I mean, active network theory came from semiotics in the first place. So it's also a way of trying to take active network theory back to the humanities where it came from, right? But and so of course, if you're familiar with for instance chapter 2 in laboratory life of Latour and Rugar, it's all about writing procedures. You know, the lab is a set of completely composed by way of writing procedures, right? But in laboratory life or in Latour's work in more general, he and colleagues were not that much interested in the contents of the document. So what we also address a lot when we're interested in document issues is that we definitely address the contents also. I mean, the semiotic and the material and materiality of the documents together. So I think that adds something also, because also in this book it's very much about what are the documents doing to the very issues, what it is doing to this nature economy relations and to the conclusion. So, and also important, it's not only a matter of controlling, it's also a matter of opposing and questioning and transforming, kind of, so it's a relational affair also, whereas the earlier Latour was very much about control at a distance, for instance.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Then another, again, two questions from the room, then one online. Federica, you're next.
Thank you for the nice and interesting presentation. I have 2 questions regarding the innovation economy. You mentioned how it's only one version of different economizations. And my question is, am I to understand that these economizations coexist? And is the innovation economy rather a progression of another form of economization? And then my second question is, you mentioned, or in the example of the cod, the farm cod failed because they either escaped or they died. So does this mean that innovation economy is inherently problematic or maybe even destructive to some extent? Or can we draw any conclusion?
Thank you for that question. It should be asked. Yes, I do think. I mean, so when you put a question like that, I think I realized that I think we were hoping that the book should work on 2 levels. On the one hand, it's kind of that there are particular ways of approaching this that can be kind of hopefully also be used as analytical lenses also for other studies, but also more particularly in our study. It's, as I said, the book is also can be read chronologically. The chapters can be read chronologically. And in that sense, it's trying to show how this particular version of economization in this particular context, which is the Norwegian economy at a particular time, where this particular form of innovation economy emerged. So it's also quite specific in that sense. And I would say probably in through other state machineries, I would suspect that it was not necessarily as a tight coupling between the innovation economy and the state, for instance. Probably that might differ somewhat between different settings. So but at least it's trying to show quite specifically how this version of economization emerges and what that entails, right? And so, and quite specifically showing how there are some problematics to this innovation economy that comes to view if one observe it in detail as we do through how it unfolds in practice. And so the question that you ask, is it inherently problematic? If you were to push me on that, I think I would say yes. I think so. There are some sides to it that is very problematic. And it's also a bit ironic, and I think it's a bit ironic for us coming from SDS, because it has so many of the virtues that we as SDS researchers are also very accustomed to. You know, practices, working together, interaction, dynamic, not so formal oriented, making things happen, you know, all of these things. But it lacks kind of the rechtsstaat. It's almost not there, for instance. I mean, so there are things that are problematic also in this way. It sounds quite unproblematic to say that we should not be so afraid of failing, because we learn when we fail. So this very simple thing, and then we try to show that, okay, if you keep failing and failing and failing, and what you have to do with are living creatures, are you then allowed? Should you be allowed to fail so many times, right? So at least at least we don't put that question or as explicitly, but at least that's the question I posed myself after having analyzed it. If you see what I mean, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, the next question is from Astrid.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. This is fantastic. I actually have 4 questions, and but somehow you answered all of them already. But I think I'll post them anyway, because I maybe you can say just a little bit more. So the last one was exactly what we just talked about now, which is what I kind of heard out of your account as well. That yeah, I was thinking, they seem to be, all these innovation economists, they seem to be A&T scholars, right? And so what does that tell us as their colleagues? And so and do you have yeah, can I push you a bit more on that? Do you have an answer on that? Because I'm thinking with Haraway, is it like responsibility, which is what they seem not to have, because they're kind of act fast and break things, kind of, and I don't think that is what we try to learn in STS, but we sometimes put this moral stance a little bit on the table, and maybe that is it seems to me maybe it's time to put it up again and say, you know, we need to have, as you just said, responsibility to these creatures. So that's one thing. So my first question is actually about it's all about this innovation economy, because I think it's really interesting. And the analysis is splendid. And I'm working on data infrastructure, so entirely different area, but it resonates so much. What I work on, what I analyze is going on in Southeast Asia and chip production, etc. It seems to be very much the same happening, and it is destructive, and I wouldn't hesitate so much to want that, but we don't have to. So my question is this specific to the ocean? Would it be a very similar you think innovation economy if you study the forest or you study lithium? So what is special to the, I mean, it doesn't have to be, but I'd like to know a little bit more about everything about that. And then I wanted to relate to Cornelius' question about, so what is good about this approach, and one of the things that we often say what is good about this kind of approaches is that you in the details you might find little screws to turn in different ways, right? So you might find in these, I mean, people like the economy, how should I intervene into economy, right? But you might find in these kind of detailed analysis, you might find little things, but you can actually intervene. So, and I think you maybe and that's why maybe you already answered that, because you pointed to chapter 8, and I haven't read the book, but I don't know that I have to do it. So what is that? What are these different practices, other good economies that you might find? So these were, that's it.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. No, I think you pointed at it yourself to begin with. And at first, I don't know. I don't think it's specific to the ocean. No, I don't. I really don't think it's specific to the ocean. And I think you raise also this very interesting issue about responsibility, but it's also a bit ironic, and also it's also because, you know, what we try to say, that it's into innovation. And it's also what is happening, that the responsibility thing is also put inside the innovation, kind of that everyone should be responsible who is doing innovation, right? So it's responsible research and innovation. And it's often SD scholars who are meant to be part of this endeavors. So it's also, I'm not sure, maybe it's problematic to radically criticize it, but there is something a bit kind of worrying, at least I think, when in the end, there's nothing outside. Everything becomes inside, potentially inside. Ethics, everything. So I think, at least for me, it's also been a way of thinking about this. And just want to continue thinking with others also about it. And of course, it's also, as I said when I introduced it, also it's interesting that all the things that are there, like the performativity, the co-modification, the things that we as Asdal scholars also tend to care for, kind of. So I just think it is something to think about, and you start kind of asking, where are the more overriding regulations, where are the agencies that are not involved in doing innovation that can kind of work upon, kind of have other infrastructures in a way. So I think, yeah. But of course, when it comes to those who are involved in doing innovation, of course, there's a lot of responsibility and a lot of interest in caring and doing things better. So it's not that, but it's more like the paradigm. It has some specific features that are kind of potentially quite problematic. But then I do think that what you point towards, that and that was the whole point about the empirical economy approach, that there are so many ways in which we can intervene in this thing that we call the economy, and that we have intervened throughout decades, and also that it's possible to show how that has happened, that most of the things that we call the economy are thoroughly political questions, and they have been political questions. And so it's possible, and has been possible, to intervene upon it. And actually, and as to the question that you asked also about the good, I mean, it's my co-author Tone. She used to say, she says that, okay, what I would like to say, I'm acting Tone now, that is that when we have been doing research on the codfish, I still want to eat codfish. So, and saying, by that saying, there's actually also something quite good about this economy, not necessarily the farm economy, but the cod fisheries that has also been developed in close exchanges with the population along the Norwegian coast for centuries. And actually, one of the reasons why Norway has such a vast territory, I mean, the sea territory, the ocean territory of the Norwegian nation state is much larger than the territory on land. And part of the reason why we have been given this responsibility is for that, so that people along the coast should be able to live from the resources in the ocean. So that's actually been a quite long-standing, quite good economy for centuries. So, I mean, it is possible, and it has been possible. Yes. And the prices of the cod sold at market, the wild cod has, as I said, been the result of large struggles to have a fair price on cod to those who were fishing the cod. That was back in the 30s and 40s. Yeah.
Okay, then we have one more question online, unless there are no other people online who want to ask questions. Please feel free to raise your hand. But first, we start with Jana. I hope the technology, where is Jana? Is Jana still there? I think she left. That's sad.
That's not good.
Okay, yeah, we made her wait for too long.
Maybe she found something in the chat.
Yeah,
no, but I was sticking to the list. Yeah. Okay. Then, are there any more questions in the room? I have maybe one last question. It's just yeah, it's out of curiosity. Was Jana back?
Dean wants to ask a question.
Perfect. Yeah, then Dean.
Maybe it would be good for you to know who they are.
Yeah.
Yes, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Yeah, my name's Dean Bavington. I'm a professor of geography at Memorial University of Newfoundland and Labrador on the traditional territory of the Beothuk and the Mi'kmaq people, as well as the Innu of Nitassinan in Labrador and the Inuit of Nunatsiavut. And first of all, I'm so happy that you stream this, and you know the cod means so much to Newfoundland, and we've had, you know, it's often compared to the Norwegian story, and I basically, my scholarship's been based on growing a question that I always asked when I was growing up in St. Anthony, which is on the northern peninsula of Newfoundland, the island of Newfoundland, very close to Labrador. My family wasn't professionally in the fishery, but I grew up in a fishing community in the late 70s and into the 80s. And I always grew up hearing the fishermen say that there was a real problem in the fishery, that, you know, they weren't getting as many fish because they were the inshore fishery in close to the coast, as opposed to the offshore fishery. But then I would hear scientists say, and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, the Canadian government directed agency that runs the fishery, that in fact there were lots of fish, but they were offshore, and you needed big boats, and you needed industrial technology, and you needed a lot of capital investment by the state originally, and then sold off to the private sector. So there was always this conflict in growing up. So when I started university in 1991, I went into biology thinking that I would learn in biology, you know, what caused this crisis in 1992 when the fisheries minister had to shut down the fishery, even though the fisheries models, the scientists had told them there was at least 300,000 metric tons available to be caught. But the dragging offshore fleet went out and there were no fish. And the fish haven't come back since 1992. We've tried the aquaculture as the solution, which always comes in, supported heavily by the state, given away to private investors with lots of feed loan guarantees. So when the fish all die of diseases that are predictable from packing them into these pens, then the private investors get bailed out at all of our expense, taxpayers' expense. And the feed companies get paid the millions of dollars in feed that is required to raise these salmon. Sorry, cod. I really liked how you talked about how the innovators are basically trying to do to cod what has been done to salmon. And in Newfoundland, we also lost the commercial salmon fishery in 1993, just 1 year after the cod. They have not all come back. And because of Norwegian capital coming into Newfoundland and investing in fish farming, Atlantic salmon are escaping and destroying all the wild salmon runs on the province, including in the Mi'kmaq First Nation, the Mi'kmaq Nation, that has a relationship with Plamu, which is the Mi'kmaq name for salmon. They're going extinct because of these farm salmon escaping. So I guess I really liked your comment at the end and the questions around the ethics here and what lessons we should take. And I've learned so much from STS and applied it, to the Newfoundland and Labrador case with cod. But I think what's lacking in STS is, and what I really liked your book, bringing in Polanyi. I think we can learn so much from Polanyi continuing on into the present around, this is capitalism, right? I mean, we've got to name what it is. It's not problematic. It's the system. It's the logic of capitalism. One thing that I've learned in my work that I haven't paid attention to, which I think is critical here, especially for Norway, talking about the economization of cod, is how cod were fed the foundation of the plantation economy. It also fed into all the proletariat, that we needed some cheap food to feed to all these people that were being displaced from rural areas. You were talking about the Norwegian inshore rural Norwegian fishing communities. Yes, but also the Sami and the indigenous people that are there that we don't bring into this conversation. We don't talk about how Norwegian cod was central, as was Newfoundland, in feeding enslaved African people, which started the whole capitalist economy 500 years ago. So I think STS requires Marxist political economy and bringing these two things together so we can broaden it out from just looking at Norway or just looking at Newfoundland as this isolated thing and understand that cod is central in our relationship to cod. The fact that we've commodified it means that we don't know how to live well with cod anymore. And I feel that innovation, science, marketization, this isn't going to get us anywhere. My university, Memorial University, our innovation center had created the first genetically modified Atlantic salmon, the aqua bounty salmon, that has now been spliced in. Ocean pout genes taken from the commons, enclosed as commodities now, with aqua bounty stock that you can now buy on the market in the United States. So I know there's no question here other than to say, I think the last questions that have come up about ethics, that's what I'm struggling with right now, is how do we go forward and what knowledge are we going to base trying to figure out how to live well with cod in different parts of the world and reimagine the Atlantic Triangle in a way that is anti-capitalist and anti-colonial and think about colonialism and capitalism together. That's what I'm trying to struggle with. And I think there's so many options with this work that you've come out with cod that allow us into this when you're talking about politicizing the economy. So I'll end there and say thank you for letting me go on and on here. It's a very emotional issue talking about cod as well here in the province. And the fact that in 1930, 100 years ago, when you were talking about Norway really built up the protective measures and the price for cod so people could live in rural Norway, in Newfoundland, we were giving up representative government in the 1930s. We became a colony run by Britain again with a commission of 6 unelected people. So we voluntarily gave up, and we only became a province in Canada in 1949. So cod is central. We're celebrating this year 75 years of being part of Canada. Many Newfoundlanders are not celebrating.
Thank you so much. May I interrupt you here shortly? Because we have 10 minutes left, and I also want to give Kristin some time to respond to your.
Absolutely.
But thank you very much. That was.
Thank you for listening.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you. And I think what you point to many important things, but one of the things you point towards is that we need to discuss economy together with the nature that economy is made from, and it's only through that we can find ways of figuring out how to live well with the nature that we take our economies from, so to speak. So I think that is really important, and I do think also we can discuss how to name the beast, so to speak. But I do think at least you point to something important, also when it comes to that the protective measures, as you call it, are very important, and different national contexts have been dealing with this differently, and that's also what I pointed towards, that in some aspects there has been very strong elements of good economies in the Norwegian fisheries also, and I think that at least is an important element of the book as such, hopefully not kind of completely depressing at that, even if I talked about now mostly the chapter on the innovation economy. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Are there any more questions in the room, online? Otherwise, I think, I would end it here.